please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. I would ask if there's any public discussion from the board this evening.
Mr. Chairman, two items. I was contacted by a resident with a complaint about service by Comcast, and they asked about how it was decided that Comcast was the deliverer of cable services, and I replied that there's a contract. When is that contract up, approximately?
I believe it's 2017.
Okay.
And they would have been the only company that responded to the RFP or whatever was put out at the time.
Residents should be aware that it is a non-exclusive contract. So anybody else who wants to come in, I think the only thing in their contract that states that nobody can get a better deal than them, because it's got to be fair to everybody. But we do not deal singly with one company. If Verizon wanted to offer services, we would negotiate a contract.
Right. They would, the economics would be that they'd have to string their own wires and go out through town and that process there. So that's a business decision at that point. But I encourage that anybody who had complaints that they file them with Town Hall, so that at the renewal point we would be able to address them with Comcast. If not, if there's a pattern of complaints, that we would address them sooner than that. So.
Sure, and if anybody has a complaint about service currently, I'm happy to receive those. Comcast does have a government liaison designated, and I work with him on a fairly regular basis, and he's been very responsive.
Great, thank you. And the other thing, based on some discussions with other boards that have gone on, Carrie, do you know if other towns have a definition of the liaison between committees? I think that one of the things that went on was what is the definition of a liaison, what their duties are, and that would help both the liaison and the committees that they're receiving the liaison.
I mean, I can check. That's not something... I'm not even sure in other places that I've worked that we've had official liaisons, but I'd be happy to check and see what other communities are doing.
Thank you.
Any other public discussion from the board? Just one continued announcement again that the Department of Public Utilities has scheduled a public hearing on the Unitil's request for a rate increase. That will be, again, Monday night, September 23rd at 7 p.m. at the Fitchburg Memorial Middle School, 615 Rollstone Street in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, 01420. So again, if you want to say something publicly about the rate increase request, that is the time to be heard and have it on record. Any public discussion from the public? Seeing none. We go to, there are no appointments, so first order of current business, town manager's request for the board to consider authorizing town council's involvement in Mass General Law, Chapter 90, Section 60, complaint about elections law.
So I think what I'm just going to do is read this short memo that I presented to you for the benefit of anybody listening to the conversation. The town was made aware on August 8th, 2013 through Town Council that the Secretary of State Elections Division had initiated a complaint regarding irregularities concerning the April 30, 2013 town election. I attached a copy of the notice of the complaint in the packet this evening, and at the time that I received the copy of the complaint, Town Council asked whether or not the town would require legal assistance. I did have the opportunity to review the matter with the town clerk and with Town Council, and while the town clerk has not requested legal assistance based on the conversations I had with Town Council, I'm recommending that Town Council be authorized. I'm recommending to the board that Town Council be authorized to participate in the investigation. And the reason is that I believe that there is a greater interest at stake that of the integrity of the election itself and the election process, which is why I'm making this recommendation. Since this involvement is outside of the scope of general legal matters, it's something that the board would need to authorize. And so I am making this recommendation to you this evening, and here to assist with the discussion or answer any questions is Joel Bard, who serves as town council for the town.
Do you have anything that you want to say as a, beyond that introduction?
By way of introduction, no. I mean,
Okay. I will say then that town manager and I spoke about this last week, and we discussed some of the communications between town council about this case and how they felt about being involved and under what guise we would be involved. And I was persuaded, and that's why I asked town manager to put this on tonight's meeting as well, that two important points. The most important point is that the involvement of town council, or the request for the involvement of town council, would be to protect the integrity of the election process for all of Lunenburg. That is what I feel as a board we need to protect more than anything. And a secondary point to this is that it should not be taken that town council is part of the Secretary of State or the Attorney General's investigation, nor are they part of the defense of the town clerk or any other parties mentioned in the complaint. They are here to monitor those things and report back to the town manager and this board those things that are of most interest for us in our awareness of everything going on in the case, and B, anything that we need to know about and possibly prepare for in regards to the case during and then after any final conclusion is reached by the Attorney General. I think those 2 points are very important for us as a town, because it's important for our electorate to know that we as a board take seriously, and that the town in general takes seriously, the integrity of the election process. So that's why I felt it should come forward. That's why I support the town manager's recommendation that we get town council involved in this to the extent that they need to be. This is not going to be a day-to-day thing. It's going to be more of a review and advise position. I will open it up to the board if anybody has any comments or questions for the board, the town manager, or town council.
Do we know the approximate amount of cost for this?
No. We don't envision it to be a lot of hours. I think actually consistent with what the chairman just said, the role, we'd envisioned our role, I mean, I wouldn't have articulated the way you just articulated it, but our thoughts are similar. We would really be an interface with the Secretary of State's office. The town clerk has replied. We weren't aware of that until recently, and so we've now seen her reply. And so there's no need for any kind of investigation at this point. If there's to be, at least not on our part, if there's to be an investigation, I imagine the Secretary of State will do some follow-up. But we will be talking with them, first of all, to assure them that fundamentally the elections are being carried out appropriately, but clearly there are some things that will have to be explored. And to be an interface with the Secretary's office, with this board, to the town clerk. I mean, ultimately, the Secretary of State's going to reply directly to the town clerk, we assume. Don't know for a fact, but we assume that'll be the case. And so we think it'll be beneficial to the town to have us be involved. Now, you may or may not know that Lauren Goldberg had been actually the chief legal counsel to the Secretary of State some years ago before she came to K&P. So she's got a very close working relationship with all the people who are there, and she's definitely one of the state's experts on this issue. So it'll be a very smooth interaction with them. But nonetheless, they're very clear on what their role is, and we see our role very similar to how you just described it.
Sure.
Anytime the board has authorized anything outside of the general contract, there's always been a limit on that, and I would recommend that if the board is going to authorize this, that you establish a limit. I just wasn't comfortable recommending something before this discussion, but I think you definitely should include that.
Mr. Chairman, I think town council just should note that my recollection of the election is different than the town clerk's response. So your comment saying that you would be assuring the Secretary of State that the election was run properly, I don't think is the position of this board, because we've not taken that position one way or the other. And I would dare say that the way that Chairman Alonso mentioned it, that you are not going to do investigation, nor you're representing the town clerk, I would be comfortable with that, in that you're representing the town's interest to find out what's going on and monitor. But before you would take a position regarding the election, I would say we would need to have another discussion about that, because I have different information than what has been provided to us tonight.
Right, and I appreciate, as I said that, I was thinking I should clarify it, and I just kept moving on. I mean, I was talking about the integrity of the electoral process, but I understand, even frankly, from what's been acknowledged, it's clear that not everything was done by the book. So thank you for making that point. I agree with you 100%.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from the board?
I think just so we do have a third party kind of able to report back to us and to the town manager and the town as to where we're at with it is important. And again, I don't see us taking a stand one way or the other on how the election was run. Is going to be handled by the state, and we'll get their findings. But, since it's the person who would normally be the interacting body with the state who's being basically looked at, I think it's important that we have someone else in the mix. So I would support having the town council involved, setting again a budget that's comfortable.
And I would just look to town council to obviously you have a better handle on what you think for hours we're going to be looking at for your time. So what would you believe is a reasonable budget for hours at this point, at this stage?
Well, let me say this. At one point, it appeared that maybe we were going to be asked to do some kind of investigation, and that's not the case. So, and that would have been time-consuming. I envision that it will be conversations back and forth that will typically run 5 to 30 minutes, and Lauren really doesn't have to do any research at all. I mean, she literally knows all of these laws off the top of her head. So I just don't know what the duration of the secretary's process is going to be, but I think this is going to be on the order of, let me say, 5 to 15 hours. Obviously, if they take 6 months, that means more conversations. But, they asked for a reply within 3 days, which wasn't particularly realistic, but from the town clerk. That tells me that the Secretary's office is looking to do this pretty quickly. I don't know how quickly they do it. But if they do it, let's say in the next 6 or 8 weeks, I just can't imagine us having that many lengthy conversations with them over a 4 to 6 week period. As I said, if they take 6 to 12 months, then it would be more hours. But, as I stand here, I'm going to guess a range of about 5 to 15 hours, just as a very rough ballpark.
You have,
And I just suggested 10 to 20 to the, as you were saying, 5 to 15. So based on that, I would recommend a budget not to exceed $3,000 for this particular matter.
And Mr. Chair, just generally, I've had the chance to reread the town charter, and there's a provision that the selectmen can ask the town manager to do investigation of various situations, and at another time, I might want to have that investigation go on of this election, but since the Secretary of State has already done that, I'm fine with deferring to that point. But I think it's important to know that as a selectman board, that it's our duty to make sure that all officials in town and committees are doing what they're charged to do, and that if we hear of information, that we don't necessarily just rely on the state. So I would be fine supporting the proposal as described tonight.
then I will entertain a motion about the town manager's request to have town councils involved with this case, with a cap of $3,000 of funding.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I don't have discussion on the motion, but I do think that before we discuss this particular matter, I think it makes sense to determine how what the decision is at the state level. But I do think that we have not discussed this as a board, and you know, I think that we may have differing opinions on it. So I'd like to see what the final decision is. But I think that, as Mr. Ebersol said, I think we do have to take a look, perhaps again, at the town charter and see what our role would be in this type of situation. So that might be something that, once we get this decision, that we need to have that discussion.
We can certainly have that discussion at a later date. Absolutely. Without further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. So your involvement, your request is approved.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Joel.
Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you next May.
Not before.
Probably sooner.
Yeah, or next week, right.
That's true.
Take care. Okay, up next, we have a presentation of sign inventory and update on the pavement management plan and other roadway issues with our own DPW Director, Jack Rodriguez, and World Tech Engineering.
All right, we've got some good news.
Good.
Thank you for having us here. The presentation this evening will be in 3 parts. The first part being the work that has been done. If you recall, our sign mandate through MUTCD, and there was an amount earmarked in our budget to do that. That work has been completed for some time, and we're here to demonstrate that program to you tonight. Part B will be on an enhancement of our existing pavement management program. World Tech Engineering has taken our information and amplified it with a focus on asset management. And thirdly, a status report, and they've just begun that. So the sign inventory is complete. The pavement management is just getting underway, as is the application for funding for our Route 13 corridor. This project was brought to the MRPC by Ms. Bertram. She and I sat together and looked at a number of projects that would be available for this funding. We identified 3 or 4 of them. We brought them to District 3, and District 3 and the MRPC at that, Brad Harris at that meeting. And they all but invited us to apply for the Route 13 corridor. So we're pretty excited about that, and we hope that that funding will be forthcoming. And World Tech is going to help us with that application at this point. So I'd like to introduce you to our consultant. I don't know if any of you, I think Tom will remember Rich Benevento. He was with Bayside Engineering at the time. We all stood on this stage and got the big cardboard check of $1.1 million from then acting Governor Jane Swift. Rich was the primary force in bird dogging our application, and stands pretty much alone in procuring that $1.1 million for us. With Rich is one of the members of his staff, Mike Pompili, who will be helping him with the PowerPoint. So I'd like to get into this more, but I'll turn it over to Rich. And I just ask, I know these are 3 very important things to us, particularly the pavement management and the new project. So I know how I can be, I know how we can be, and get off on tangents. So if it's okay with you, we're going to go right through it. And if you want to jot down some questions or concerns or comments, we're here. We're at your disposal. Okay, Rich? If you want this, you can put it up there, I guess. Not good dead. Awesome. Are you going to be okay with the technology part here now?
Yeah.
So do you need another chair or someplace to put that on?
A little bit down here in the middle of the room.
Probably just click the mouse, right, and go to the next thing.
Okay.
Does that work? Here we go. Well, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to come in and to be working with the town again. It's great to be back at. Jack, when was that project? In the mid-90s? I think I had long hair at that time.
I'm going to ask you to use the mic.
Oh,
for
use the
people
mic?
at home, yes. Yeah, we can hear you here, but,
What do you mean I never had long hair? Sure I did. But in any case, we're back, and we're delighted to be back. Again, Mike Pompili is one of our engineers at WorldTech. He's a traffic engineer. He has been spearheading the asset management work at our office. What I wanted to do tonight is go through a little bit of the history of what was driving the sign management program, because there's been a lot of discussion about that over the years. Really what was driving it was retroreflectivity, but we've done some enhancements to that relative to the manual on uniform traffic control devices. As a matter of fact, Bay State Roads engaged WorldTech to do 5 workshops across the state to discuss the latest changes and regulations with the federal manual. It was interesting because not only did we have public works directors attending and MassDOT folks attending, but we had planners, and interestingly enough, a lot of police departments, because they're very interested in enforcement and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the manual. We're going to talk a little bit about the state and local requirements, and obviously the federal requirements. Gets into traffic sign sizes and types and all that sort of thing. We're going to zip right through that stuff. I mean, this workshop we did for Bay State Roads was all day. So we'll try and get through it relatively quickly.
try to pare that down.
Yeah, we'll pare that down. Retroreflectivity, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the program that you folks now have in town. We were out a few months ago to install it at Jack's office. We've gone through that. And we're going to show you how that works tonight. And then we'll talk a little bit about pavement management and the pavement management program and why it's important. The interesting thing about the pavement management program is it can be integrated into this database and this asset management program that's already been set up for the sign. So this will be, Jack would be able to sit right at his desktop and be able to use this stuff. It's all non-proprietary software. If you have Microsoft Office, you have access, then you have the program. As well as ArcView and GIS mapping that most of the communities have. The important thing about both programs, both the signs and the pavement, is the capital planning component of it. And that's really what this comes down to, being able to utilize your funds, the funds that you have, albeit limited, but be able to use them to the maximum extent possible. And that's both bringing your signs up to date, making sure that your ordinances are in place, as well as having the tools, the management tools, to have an effective pavement management program for not only next year, but the years to come, and be able to utilize that money. At the very end, we're going to talk about the Chase Road, a little update on the funding program that you folks already have started, and we'll give you a little bit of an update on what needs to be done in order to secure those funds. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and he's going to go through the sign program with you. You going to click yourself?
Nope, I'm not going to use the mouse. So this is the document that's driving this initiative, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD. It's available on the web, always the latest version at that address on the FHWA website. This document first appeared in 1935, and since 1966 it's been federal law that any agency with roadways under its jurisdiction have to comply with the mandates in it. The latest version is from 2009 with revisions in 2012, and I'll get into what those revisions were because that's a big part of what we've been doing. In addition to the federal document, Massachusetts has its own amendments to the MUTCD, also available on MassDOT's website. As a rule, these have to be more stringent than the federal. They can't have more leniencies over what's in the federal document. So it's another thing that we pay attention to when we're out collecting signed data, making sure we're complying with MassDOT requirements as well as the federal. A couple of things in addition to amendments to the MUTCD in this document are template for local ordinances, traffic rules and orders, making sure all of your regulatory signs are go through a standard process for acceptance through Board of Selectmen and are codified into law so that they can actually be enforced. So some of the categories of signs that would be in traffic rules and orders: parking signs, stop signs, one-way streets, no left turn, right turn, zones of quiet, and also school zones and speed zones, which have a bit more detail in this document as well. School zones actually have warrants. This is the 20-mile-an-hour school zone speed limit. Only applied to schools that are grades 1 through 8, not a kindergarten, not a high school. Children need to cross the roadway at an unsignalized crosswalk in the area, and also there are certain distances from the school. So it's another thing we look at for compliance. And speed zones. There's process you have to go through to put up the black on white speed limit sign. Requires a detailed engineering study to see what the traffic is actually going, and then that speed needs to be approved by Mass DOT, by the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and the Board of Selectmen before those signs can be put up. So that pretty much covers in a nutshell the local, the state regulations. Back to the federal manual, that signs are in 3 basic categories: regulatory signs, which convey laws, stop, speed limits, parking regulations; warning signs call attention to a situation that may not be readily apparent, like a curve or pedestrians; and guide signs, which show directions, points of interest, street name signs. One of the we look at a few categories of sign attributes for compliance with the MUTCD. One is sign legend. The manual says that symbols on a sign need to be unmistakably similar to or mirror images of the symbols that are in the manual. So any non-standard signs we flag as non-compliant. And any signs that only have word legends need to match the wording that's in the manual, unless there's no comparable message in the manual. Then you could have a non-standard word legend sign. But if there is a sign in the manual that's similar, for instance, a word legend that says dangerous intersections, not a standard sign, it would need to be the intersection symbol. Another thing we look for are standard signs that may have been eliminated. So these were standard in the past, so there are several examples that are still around. The reduced speed ahead sign has been replaced with one with a picture of a speed limit sign and an up arrow. Lane end sign needs to have the dashed lines. Two-way, three-way, four-way stop signs are no longer standard. It needs to be all-way. Pedestrian crossing signs with the crosswalk lines are not standard. The standard now is a pedestrian with the diagonal downward arrow below it. And school zone signs can no longer be yellow. They need to be a fluorescent yellow-green color. Sign sizes, we pick up, make sure that signs meet the minimum standard sizes in the manual. These vary based on number of lanes on a road, speed on a road, classification. Lunenburg, they're typically all 2-lane roads, so pretty much the minimum size. But one example of a sign that's not compliant, stop signs have a minimum size of 30 inches. So 24-inch stop signs, which were standard decade or more ago, are no longer compliant with the manual. Street name signs, which actually we did not inventory. We only looked at regulatory warning and guide signs, not street name signs, but there's a lot of confusion over them because of new regulations in 2009. Street name signs now need to be a combination of upper and lowercase letters, no longer all uppercase. And also different colors. The only acceptable colors for a street name sign are a white legend on a green background, blue background, or brown background, or a black legend on a white background. In addition, Massachusetts only allows any background other than green by special permission from district. So the column on the right are all unacceptable. The green sign with uppercase letters and other different colored backgrounds. The text itself needs to be a specific alphabet series, specific font. It's FHWA Series D, which is shown on the slide. So any other kind of fancier scripts are also not allowed in street name signs. Also in Massachusetts, this language is from the Massachusetts amendments, borders shall be provided on street name signs. So a street name sign without a border is permissible from the MUTCD, but Massachusetts doesn't allow it. They require a border. One other thing is street name signs are still allowed to be on an 8-inch blade in the federal manual, but MassDOT now requires all street name signs to be a minimum of 12 inches with a 6-inch uppercase letter and 4.5-inch lowercase letters. A little bit of confusion about what you have to do with your street name signs. Do I need to go run out and replace all the street name signs in the town now to comply? No. There's never been a requirement to change a sign just so it displays upper and lower case, but when you're replacing a sign when it reaches the end of its useful life with a new sign, that's when it needs to comply and be in upper and lower case on a 12-inch blade with a border. We also look at the location of signs. Not going to get into any detail here really, but these are just standard details in the MUTCD for where a sign should be. Height, offset from the edge of roadway. We don't really look at the offset because that's typically, in a constrained right-of-way. You're not going to cut down trees to try to get the sign 12 feet off the road, but we do look at height, which is typically 7 feet off the ground. And retroreflectivity, which is really the big driver on the asset management program and conducting sign inventories. The previous edition of the manual was in 2003. These retroreflectivity requirements came out in a revision to that manual in 2007. It says that regulatory warning and guide signs shall be retroreflective or illuminated. And retroreflective means when light hits an object, it comes directly back in the direction it came from. So if you're driving and your headlights hit a sign at night, it's like your headlights are causing that sign to illuminate itself. Simply having a street light over a sign as indirect lighting does not satisfy the requirement. The revision also set minimum levels of retroreflectivity for the sign to have in order to be compliant. Why is this important? Crash data shows that the crash rate at nighttime is 3 times that during the daytime, even though the distance traveled at night is only, the number of miles traveled at nighttime is only 25% during the day, but the number of fatal crashes is more than 45% of them occur at night. Also, visibility of traffic signs is increasingly more important as the driver population ages. There are more older drivers on the road, need more light to see the signs. Not all signs need to meet these requirements. Parking signs don't need to. Any walking, hitchhiking signs, acknowledgement signs, any signs with blue or brown backgrounds, or any signs that are only used by bicycles and pedestrians. So we do not test retroreflectivity on any of those signs since they don't need to meet the requirements. The 2007 revisions to the 2003 manual also set compliance dates for having signs meeting these minimum levels of retroreflectivity. All agencies with signs under its jurisdiction, towns, states, even private streets that are open to public travel, had to have some kind of assessment and management system in place by January 22nd, 2012. And all regulatory warning and post-mounted guide signs needed to meet those minimum levels by January 2015, and all street name signs and overhead guide signs by 2018. The 2009 full revision of the manual came out, not just the 2007 was just a revision to certain text in the manual, kind of flew under the radar. When the full 2009 edition came out, there was kind of some backlash because it was really when people were seeing this for the first time. The comment period for the revision was reopened in November 2011. A lot of agencies complained about this unfunded mandate, not being able to replace all their signs in time. So in June 2012, the 2009 manual was revised to change these compliance dates. Having the system in place to assess the signs and come up with a replacement program. The deadline's now June 14th, 2014, which means you're covered since we've completed it already. The actual dates to replace the signs have been eliminated, and the language is now based on resources and relative priorities. So it basically means you need to develop a capital plan. You can't just say, hey, we're going to allocate 10 cents a year for the next 100 years to replace a couple of signs. There needs to be a good faith effort plan in place to get the signs up to compliance. Yeah, right. Not saying it was, of course. Okay, yeah. 26, just to be safe, yeah. So, do you have to do this? Federal Highway Administration says any public agencies or officials having jurisdiction over signs shall use an assessment or management method. And just having that method in place means you are in compliance, even though there are some signs themselves that don't meet the retroreflectivity requirements. And what if you ignore that? Federal Highway Administration says having a plan in place, even if the signs don't meet the requirements, are enough to defend the jurisdiction against tort liability. If there's a fatal crash at night, someone says, well, my client's deceased relative couldn't see the stop sign and that's why he was killed. You can say, well, we know and we have a plan in place to replace that. Federal Highway Administration says that would absolve you of the liability. If you don't and you're ignoring these retroreflectivity levels, then you could potentially be liable. So the asset management program that we implement, why do it? It's proactive instead of reactive. It inventories all the signs that you already have, shows which ones not only meet retroreflectivity requirements, but also there's other requirements I mentioned, height, legend, size, and actually being a standard sign. It reduces your risk of tort liability by having the system in place. It's a very hard system that you can pull off the shelf, turn on the computer, and show that you have it. It's easy to develop a short-term and a long-term replacement plan for signs, and all the data is located in one central database. What we do is establish the inventory of existing signs by going out in the field with a tablet, laptop, and a GIS map, plotting each individual sign as a data point on a map, which connects to a Microsoft Access database. We pick up the type of sign, regulatory warning guide, its size, the legend, condition of the sign. So we're not going to bother testing retroreflectivity on a sign that's already damaged or not in compliance to begin with. The type and condition of its support, the sheeting material, which I'll touch on a little bit, and if it is compliant in every other way, then we have a device called a retroreflectometer, shines a laser at the sign and gives that reading back to see if it meets the minimum retroreflectivity level. Based on all this data, then we can assess compliance with the MUTCD, state requirements, and local ordinances if we're tasked to do that. For Lunenburg, we did not look at local ordinance compliance. That data is in two different interfaces. There's a GIS map, which I'll show you the actual program in a minute. Each sign is a color-coded point, which you can call up an attribute table. It shows all the data we collect on the sign in a graphical interface.
Mike, incidentally, this is what, I'm sorry, this is what is on Jack's desktop right now. Yep. So he can pull up any place in town, and are we going to go to the program and actually give them a demo? Sure.
And then there's also an interface through Microsoft Access where you have the database itself, the form showing all the attribute data, and then buttons to create custom reports showing different different reports for the inventory. I'll show you the program here.
One more thing while Michael's pulling this up. So because it's an Access database, this can be queried any way you want. So if Jack wanted to know where he wanted to know all the signs on Chase Road, he can pull up Chase Road. Or if he wanted to know, well, where are all the stop signs in town? And to tell him where all the stop signs are in town. If he wanted to know, one of the attribute data points that we pick up is obstructions. So if he wanted to know where every sign in town that has an obstruction, and it actually says what the obstruction is, branches, leaves, another sign, he could pull those up. That's that's good maintenance activities that can be done locally. I will tell a quick story. We did one town, and the community came back and said, hey, all the signs you said are obstructed are not obstructed. And we said, well, what are you talking about? And of course, they were out looking at the signs in February, and we did the data collection in August, so they were obstructed.
So this is the map interface. It's going to be kind of hard to see on the projector screen. It's a little faint, but there's a circle. You can hover over the signs, which are color-coded points based on what type of sign it is. The red dots are regulatory signs, the yellow are warning signs, etc. And then click to lock the circle down. And then there are images of signs. Just click on the sign here, and if you can see that one of them lit up in a light blue, and then you can bring up an attribute table showing all of the information on that sign. It's a stop sign. It's on West Townsend Road. It's standard color, standard size. It's diamond grade prismatic in good condition on a U-channel post, but the retroreflectivity failed just by clicking that button. And the Microsoft Access interface, this is the form that shows data on an individual sign. This one's a stop sign on Arbor Street, standard size, standard shape. It's an engineering grade sheeting on a utility pole. It's in good condition on a damaged U-channel post, mounted at the correct height, but it failed retroreflectivity. And then there are individual buttons to generate reports, the general inventory reports, detailed descriptions of signs by street. Oops. Which is a little difficult to do on the projector screen, unfortunately, but 3 signs on Andrew Terrace. And then compliance reports, and then, like Rich said, maintenance reports. So all the obstructed signs, Jack can, generate this report, give it to someone to go out and on Arbor Street, there are 7 obstructed signs, 6 of them by plant growth. Go out and trim the plants. So now just a little detail on the actual inventory data. There are 938 regulatory warning and guide signs we picked up throughout the town. This does not include street name signs. We didn't look at those. Most of them, 346 of them, were regulatory. The second most common, you see, are called unlisted. Those are signs that are not in the MUTCD. They're non-standard signs like children's signs, no dumping, those kind of signs. And the third most common would be warning signs, about a quarter. And then actually 9 of them were posts with no sign at all. 10% of the signs were not standard size. 17% were obstructed. Almost half of them were not mounted at the correct height. Of the signs that were compliant in every other way, actually height would be okay, but any signs that were not a standard legend or size or were damaged, we would not test for retroreflectivity. If it was compliant in every way or just non-compliant for height, we would test its retroreflectivity. 294 signs we ended up testing, and 36% of those passed. And there's a breakdown by material, which I won't get into detail on. So in total, actually 93% of the signs we looked at were not compliant. Again, nearly half of them just for height. So those are easy to go out and reset, not necessarily to replace. But only 67 signs were fully compliant. I'm going to turn it over to Rich. He'll talk a little bit about the pavement inventory that we're just starting.
No, Jack wanted to go through the whole thing, you said first. Is that correct, Jack? You want to do the whole presentation?
Question from the town manager. But I thought we might go through
I
it.
didn't know if you wanted to take questions just on the sign portion before you went into
Would you want to do that?
management.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, three questions. Does the database have the date or the fact that the Board of Selectmen have approved the sign location?
No, we did not do a local ordinance compliance as part of this.
Do we have the listing of when we adopted the various?
So part of the inventory that we do is MUTCD compliance. In many communities, we do a local ordinance review as well. We did not do a local ordinance review in Lunenburg. We recommend that you do that, and the reason is that precisely what you're talking about. We've been in some communities that have no ordinance at all. I think in one community we were researching Selectmen Meeting minutes from like 1939, and then some other communities have traffic rules and orders as part of their bylaws. The problem is, 30 years ago, I lived next door to Jack, and I said, hey, can we get a stop sign at the end of the street? And he says, oh, yeah, sure. And we put one up, and it never got endorsed by the Board of Selectmen. The traffic rules and orders in the amendments to the MUTCD, the Massachusetts amendments to the MUTCD, says that regulatory signs have to be adopted by the ruling body of the town. So is that something that should be done? We think it is. The police department love it because it actually gives them teeth into regulatory enforcement. Right now, if someone ran a stop sign and it's not part of your traffic rules and orders, it could be challenged.
I think we have a pretty good record of keeping that record, but I don't know where that is.
Yeah.
I would encourage that we make sure we do it, because I know that the other issue that came up was stop signs on private ways and whether this police department had the right to enforce those. That happen. There's several street signs like that around town on private ways, and whether the police have the power to enforce a stop sign violation or if there was an accident there. And I don't know if we have the authority to authorize a sign on a private way. We may be able to, but I think that we already have the traffic rules and regulations that state where most of the street signs are, because I remember when I was town clerk that there were regular adoptions when there were new streets. And so it's got to be somewhere, and that I'm assuming would be fairly easy to add to the access database for when the selectmen adopted it. And if not, then we need to get the inventory, review it, and ratify it as a board.
Is it a ratification of the Board of Selectmen? You said the ruling body, which is different for a Board of Selectmen versus town meeting. So my question is it a bylaw that has to be adopted, or is it simply a vote of the Board of Selectmen?
In most communities, it's a vote of the Board of Selectmen. I don't know what the town charter says, but I mean,
okay.
you folks adopt laws in the community for all sorts of things, and you vote on it. Now, I can't imagine that you would take a traffic ordinance to town meeting and decide if...
But we don't adopt, we can't, I mean, we are a licensing authority, but we can't adopt a bylaw or a law without town meeting action.
No,
so that's
no,
one of the...
But the bylaw would say that we have the authority to do this.
Correct.
But
Okay.
that's already our purview, is we have control over the roadways in town, the Board of Selectmen.
That's right.
The
And as a member of this board for almost 9 years now, I don't know, except for accepting plans of new developments, I don't know that we've ever adopted a single sign placement of any kind that I can remember.
Yeah, nor
Except
can I.
ones
Nor
that were
can I.
included in project developments.
So the question would be whether the stop sign at Tri-Town or some of the other...
Well, Tri-Town is probably, we adopted a whole project plan. So the bigger projects, I think, anything that we've put individually, I think may be subject to the scrutiny that you're asking.
Yeah.
But I think the larger projects that went through the planning board, we accept public ways and we accept the...
But I think that
improvements.
accepting the way is different than accepting the street
sign.
the street
I
sign.
think it is.
That
I think
came
it's a
up-
different vote.
Yeah.
That recently came up in a community we're working with, and there was I think, misinformation that if the planning board, for example, accepted a plan and it was recorded at the registry, then whatever on that plan is law. And that's not the case. With traffic signs and things like that, they would have to be part of your bylaw.
Okay, so there you go. So then that excludes even that. So in 9 years, I don't know that we've ever approved one from this board.
Yeah.
And actually, looking at your bylaw, whatever you have, we have all of the information. So we would know if, once we read the bylaw, here's a stop sign on XYZ Street, gee, that's not in the bylaw, or in your traffic rules and orders. And some communities have had none, so we're actually writing an ordinance for them, in which case it would come to the board and you would adopt it in one fell swoop.
I do think we're gonna have to look into this some more, and I think this is an agenda item we're gonna have to follow up on exactly what we have in place and what bylaws or ordinances. We give us the power to do this, so we have to look at this.
Mr. Chairman, the second one is cross-street signs. Something about New England, we tell you what street you may want to turn off on, but won't necessarily tell you what street you're on. And I realize that like a street like Massachusetts Avenue would have a lot of cross streets. Are there regulations on the federal or state level on that part?
There are no regulations. The MUTCD recommends having a sign on each corner for both streets. As you know, as someone who travels around a lot to different communities in New England, I really appreciate when they're on both corners of every street, but there's no requirement for it.
Okay. I mean, certainly GPS makes some changes. And then my last question, Mr. Chairman, is when we do replace the signs, we recycle the metal. We have a process by which we recycle in town for that?
We do. In fact, we were able to donate a considerable amount of money, much to my dismay, to the general fund as we demolished went through the highway renovation. So yes, we have a spot for that, and we regularly bring that cash to town hall.
Thank
Sure,
you.
you got it back, Jeff.
I'm sorry that saddens you, by the way.
Okay. Any more questions on the sign component?
No.
No?
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
So now we'll talk quickly about pavement management. And I'm sure you're all familiar with pavement management and what it's all about. But it's really to develop a tool for you to use so that you're utilizing the funds that you have and improving your pavement condition overall. And it's to take those funds and not necessarily repair your worst roads, all your worst roads. It's a blend so that you're repairing some of your worst roads, but at the same time, doing preventative maintenance on the others. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Obviously, financial benefits, you're extending pavement life, greater predictability in what your maintenance costs are going to be because you know which roads are at what level of deterioration and what you're going to do to fix them. It's also important for coordinating other infrastructure improvements. So you're not going to necessarily fix a bad road this year when in 2 years you know you're going to replace the water main out there. So a little bit more thought process as you're going into your improvement strategies. Obviously, the user satisfaction, better overall network condition, better rideability, reduce vehicle damage. We know, I know I hit a couple of potholes with my car, not in this community. Actually, it was on a state highway. They said, sorry, can't help you. It's actually good for property values. Anytime you're repairing a street, obviously that it improves the property values on that street. And it's really a proactive approach as opposed to waiting for you all to get phone calls, when is my street going to get fixed? It's a more a deliberate approach on how you're going to take care of this important asset within the community. When we set up a pavement management program, and as I mentioned earlier, this can be integrated into the sign program as well. There's just another tab on that program that Jack would have on his desktop. But we design the program based on various attributes, based on various deterioration types, alligator cracking, lineal cracking, shoving, raveling, all the various types of deterioration. It's set up on the town's GIS mapping, similar to what you just saw the mapping that we use for the signs. In your case, you've already done the field inspection. Jack has some great information that he's been accumulating on the condition of the roadways. We are going to take that information and integrate it into the database. So we'll take that information that's already available and integrate it into the database, which was a substantial savings for the town. Otherwise, we would have been out there inventorying every street. Once that information is into the database, we're going to come up with an existing condition summary. Generally, the roads are rated between 0 and 100, with 0 being start over and 100 being newly reconstructed. There's that summary helps us to do a priority assessment of which roads we're going to do. And remember, just because a road has a failing grade doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do that road, because we may not have the funds to do that road. I'm going to show you what those numbers look like when you see the deterioration curves. And the bottom line in all of this is developing a capital plan. To be able to say, okay, in 2014, we are going to, or we need to, not we're going to, but we need to appropriate X amount of dollars in order to get our overall rating. Because we're gonna have all of the roads in the database. We're gonna come up with the town's overall rating for its roads. Let's say your overall rating is 68, and you know what? As a goal, we want to get to 72. And in order to get to 72, it's going to cost $20 million. Not that much, maybe $8 million. And you can start picking away at that over a period of time. The reason I say 20 million is because in order to repair every road, we'll give you that number too. So based on the deterioration of each and every road in town, it would say if you wanted to bring everything up to 100, it would cost X amount of dollars. And that's usually quite an eye-opener, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. So again, it's similar to what you just saw with the signs. There's different reports that can be generated from this. The most important one, obviously, is to developing the capital plan. A lot of folks say, well, I want a 5-year capital plan. This is a dynamic document only because we live in a dynamic climate. We could have a very mild winter, and everything in the pavement management program we're going to do. We're going to crack fill some roads. We're going to mill and overlay some roads. We're going to reclaim some roads. We're going to reconstruct some roads. On the other hand, we may have a real bad winter, and those roads that we were thinking about, some of those roads that we were thinking about crack filling, maybe we need to mill and overlay those now. So it's a dynamic document. If you go out 5 years, you're really kind of pushing it, because chances are whatever you're predicting 5 years out is probably going to change. Usually we go 3 at the most, but 1 and 2 is really important. It's part of the GIS interface with ArcMap. A map will be generated. The map is color-coded, so you can very easily look at the map. You can see here there's some roads that have a red line on them. Those are bad roads, versus the ones with green and blue. Those are better roads. So this is, again, it's an easy way to just take a quick look and come up with that assessment. It's a great tool for Jack to be able to look throughout the town and say, okay, where do we want to focus some of our investment dollars? This is the deterioration curve I was telling you about. Again, it helps you with budgetary requirements. Obviously, if you have a road in excellent condition on year 1, if you don't do anything in about 15 years, 10 to 15 years, you're into the very poor category and you're spending a lot of money. Excuse me. So certainly, you want to take some of those roads that are in fair condition, between fair and good condition, and do some advanced technologies or some crack filling. Advanced technologies might be like hot in place recycling, things like that, low cost kind of items, versus when you get down to the very bottom, reclamation and reconstruction is a lot more expensive. Matter of fact, some quick calculations. Go to the next slide. So this was a sample town. Is this Watertown? It's Watertown. And if they wanted to bring everything up to 100%, it would cost them $92 million. And of course, nobody's going to do that. But it gives you an idea of the cost to try and do a reconstruction project. So for example, to do 14 miles of reconstruction would cost $27 million, versus you could do 11 miles of mill and overlay at $7 million. These numbers break down to $2 million a mile to, when you get down to crack filling, about $5,500 a mile. Now, if we go back one slide, you can see that we want to keep the roadways up in that good to fair condition category, because once you get down to poor and very poor, the cost is exponential to repair those roads. Now, you may recall me saying earlier, well, we're not going to fix all of our worst roads first. And the reason you don't do that, they've already failed. So we need to make some investment in our roads that we can do some preventative maintenance on and keep those roads intact, so that we can stretch those dollars out. As part of the system, obviously we'll be working with Jack and his staff to use the program. We started to do that with the signs. Again, it's access database. It's not, there's some other programs out there that require program updates every year. There's an annual cost for that, or if you're not using it every day, they're pretty difficult to use. Also, updated data as the repairs are completed, we want to put that stuff in. So if a road had a rating of 50 and we went out and did a mill and overlay, and now that road is, up in the 90s. We want to change those so that each year when we're developing the capital plan, we don't want to see those roads reoccurring, so that they're being identified as having been repaired and have a better paving condition index. It also helps in identifying annual costs, so you can kind of keep track of what you're spending, how you're spending, and what those costs are coming in through the bid process and putting projects out to bid as well. We recommend re-inspecting your roads periodically, either every 2 years or at least every 3 years, to go out and re-inspect the roadways. Now, you can start with a process of, not doing them all in 1 year. Maybe you do half of them this year and you do the next half the following year. So this is that constant cycle of reevaluating the roads. Again, dynamic climate. There's we see that all the time. Springtime comes and roads that you thought were in pretty good shape are no longer in great shape for whatever reason. One of the things we do too is we look at the Chapter 90 list versus what the town list is of accepted streets. And in some cases, a lot of communities have had roadways that are accepted roadways in the community, but they're not on the Chapter 90 list. So we'll fill out the form to revise your Chapter 90 list and get those roads accepted as part of Chapter 90, which is a great thing because it increases your Chapter 90 allotment, because Chapter 90 is based on lane miles. So that's one of the things that we do too. Plus, if you have new roads, we want to include those. If it's a new subdivision that's been accepted by the town, we want to include those in the database as well. And as I mentioned earlier also, this is great for utility coordination because not only local utilities, like if Public Works is going to go out and replace the water main, but we also want to know what's the gas company have plans for? What's Comcast or anyone else who's in the ground out there? What are they planning to do? We have had a maintenance program for a community, and a street was on the list for next year, and we heard the gas company was in. That project got deferred to the following year. The worst thing we want to do, both from a wasteful in terms of financing, but also just in terms of when people say, what are they thinking? They just paved the road and now they're digging it up. A lot of communities, we have written street opening requirements for them as well. Moratorium, for example, if it's a newly paved road or if the road's in very good condition, if the gas company or anyone else is thinking about coming in and doing an improvement, emergency is one thing, but they just want to sort of upgrade their lines, 5-year moratorium. You're not digging the road up. And if you have to dig it up, certain requirements in terms of curb-to-curve patching and things like that. Because one of the things that we pick up, one of the attributes we pick up is utility patches. That draws the deterioration number down. That paving condition index number drops based on the number of utility cuts that are in a particular street. So all of these things sort of play into how all of this works. And that, did I blast through that quick enough? We can, but we'll take questions as well on the pavements.
Anybody have any questions?
I just have a question on the system maintenance. Is that something that you guys do, is that World Tech does, or is the system dynamic enough that the staff can update the data, can update add new roads, et cetera, or is that something that has to be outsourced?
No, the intent is that you would be able to do it here locally.
Okay.
Now, some communities have said, we'll do it, we have the staff to do it. Other communities have said, we'd prefer you to come in because you can send someone out for, a week and get it done. So it's either, but the intent is that it could be done locally.
Okay, and it is a Microsoft Access database. Is it open source code or is it closed source code? I'm an Access programmer, so that's I'd like to understand how the Access database.
Open source code.
It's just an Access.
But it's not an MDE lockdown file, or is it?
It's an MDB.
Okay.
It's a geodatabase. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Rubisol.
the database, is it just the public roads in town, or does it include any of the private roads?
Actually, just to add to Ms. Bertram's question, it could be converted to any data format.
Right.
Yeah, we've actually worked with communities who use Cartograph, and we just give them a CSV. But the way we tie it into ArcMap is a personal geodatabase. The database itself is based on MassDOT's road inventory file, which includes all roads town accepted, state highway, local. Usually we only inspect the town maintained roads for the town, but the actual road inventory file already has the centerline data for any roadway in the town.
Just as a side question, Jack, do we maintain or plow any private ways?
That's a great question, and it's sort of a gray area. We would not be sanding and plowing aside. We would not be maintaining in terms of grading, paving. There is a bylaw in the town which is equally gray that says that if during a storm or emergency situations and winter conditions specifically, if we can get down there with a sander and a plow for public safety, we make every effort to do so. There could be obstructions, et cetera, and we have to look at the safety of the person driving the vehicle as well as the vehicle itself. But in terms of maintaining private ways, no.
Okay. And my last question is, does this system deal with segments of road? So, for instance, Chase Road we're currently looking at one portion of it. Does it have the ability to track the condition of one portion of it versus another portion?
Absolutely. Typically, how we collect the data is from cross street to cross street. So if you had, Chase Road, we'd do it in segments for a couple of reasons. One, it's in order to collect the data, you need to know where you are, but also there may be different types of deterioration and different types of improvements to improve that deterioration on a long segment of road. I mean, if it's a short street, a couple hundred feet, we're probably not going to segment that. But on long streets, absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
We do have an extensive amount of data in Excel format that I think I heard you say that the plan is to bring that data over into the database. Has that been done, or is the database itself still in construction?
We're just getting underway with this. We're setting up the mapping and setting up the data files. Jack has sent over some of the information. We need to get the rest of it and get underway. But we're just getting started.
Okay. You mentioned the field inspections and the importance of doing that. When was the last field inspection that was done?
You remember when we first presented this that we all were in agreement that it should be 3 to 5 years, which is pretty consistent with Rich's presentation. It's 5 years. I don't know. I know many of you have sat through the presentations that I've made by myself, and I hope you hear the similarities in this. The deterioration curve, Mr. Ebersol's question about sections, the numbers, the pavement defect index. I have it going in one direction, they have it going the other direction. It could be 1 through 10, 10 through 1, 10 through 100, but it is basically ours is the heart of this system. So we really have a leg up in terms of transferring all this data. We now have everything on paper. We knew it was going to be cumbersome. It's to the point where we need this database. The timing's perfect. This is going to be a great tool, and of course amplify what we have. And I think particularly when you listen to a capital plan, this is something that's very important town-wide.
The prioritization, too, I didn't really get into that too much, but the prioritization is based on several components. First of all, functional classification of the roadway, arterials, collectors, local 1, local 2, types of deficiency, alligator cracking, utility trenches, shoving, raveling, all those types of things, available funding, how much money is available to do this, and maintenance activities. What type of maintenance activities? So really, we take all of that information and boil it all down. Obviously, arterial and collector roadways are very important. They carry the most amount of traffic. So those are important roadways. But you can't neglect also the local roads. So you need to, as I mentioned earlier, you need to be a blend in terms of even prioritizing which roadways are going to be in your plan and what you're going to try to accomplish in any given year.
Mr. Matthews.
So the question I have is more for the town manager, because as Jack just pointed out, a lot of what we're talking about from this system is very similar to what he's produced in his own office. So my question is, when did we decide to make this purchase, and what's it costing? Because I don't remember having a conversation about going into a full pavement management plan outsourced to an engineer.
Well, let me start the answer. I can't answer the question on the cost off the top of my head, but I think and speaking for myself, the plan that we have now, the pavement management plan, I think is really based on that worst first, is how it was put together. And if you, I'll do my answer, and you can add to that. And I guess in the way that I thought of it was that we would put this plan together. We would be able to demonstrate to the board, the community, the condition of the roads and our approach to maintaining those roads. We put all of that together. We've been following that plan with the limited funds that are available. And then we attempted through the override to secure a big chunk of money to make this plan happen. And I guess in my own naive way thought when we put this together, it would be accepted in that we would get that amount of money so that we could work on the roads, and that the plan we had in place then, it was a workable plan because we would have a substantial amount of money each year and we would be able to tackle the roads. And what we found is even since we've had the plan, we haven't had the level of Chapter 90 that we had hoped. We haven't until this year had any additional local money, and we don't have the override. And so it seemed to be time to take another look at the plan and be able to break it out into these bigger road projects, but then have a lot more definition on this preventative maintenance that we need to do so that we could better allocate the funding that we had. And Jack shook his head, so I know he doesn't agree with something I said, so please
I couldn't,
add to that.
it's only the very first, and I think it may be semantics, a very good answer, actually. It's not, I think you meant to say not worse first. We'll see, we'll take any road that's really in dire shape and say, well, this is in worse condition than any that you're looking at paving today. And Rich touched on it, which is you've heard from me, the roads are prioritized. We have different language, arterial, collector, whatever, however you do it, it's 1 through 4 or 1 through 5. You've seen that on our data sheet. And the lower roads, when I mean lower, the short local roads with minimal traffic, although they may be in critical condition, they will never score higher than your main roads. And the example I always use is coming out of Hickory Hills on Crest, whatever it is down there, and then you go into Townsend Harbor, then you go into Lancaster Ave, then you go into Route 70, and then you're on Route 2. So all those main roads, those collector roads, those arterial roads, whatever languages you want to use, are of more importance. The interesting thing about this is that we will expand that with the understanding that we will look at funding, and of course it's all funding driven, to have more of a mix. But as a rule and philosophically, and this board and has bought into that, is that we go on that criteria of not necessarily worst first, but of the busiest roads, the ones that carry the most volume, are first.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, I did say worst first, and I meant worst first, but I meant according to the evaluation system that we came up with. So an arterial or a collector that was in a medium condition is rated as worse than a residential street that has completely failed. I think the difference between what this program is and what we have is this program, there's more data, more emphasis on the preventative maintenance, which is not really what we're doing. The money that we have is going towards mill and overlay. We don't have enough to do reclamation or reconstruction, but we're really doing those mill and overlay projects and not spending a whole lot on crack sealing and other types of preventative maintenance. And I think that's the difference between the two plans.
Certainly marginal, minimal amounts.
Right.
And we've, because of decisions that have been made, have doubled that amount. It's certainly not as significant, but you're exactly right, mostly milling and overlay. But we've expanded the crack sealing program and the amount we're doing because we've had such great success with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
the cost of this, I believe we were talking about $11,700
$11,700.
or so. That we had some leftover Chapter 90 money that we, at the end of the year, that wasn't enough to do another project. And it seemed like this would be a good investment to be able to put together a plan that is going to work better here in town based on the fiscal reality.
So it's $11,700 to set it up once, and then ongoing, I'm assuming there's some costs that go with that annually.
In that,
Well,
I mean, you can.
maintenance
I don't-
software
no,
costs,
no.
maybe. I don't know.
Let's, let me have Rich answer that.
I mean, that's up to the town. If Jack came back and said, gee, we can't get at this and would like to, over the next 3 years, each year, take a third of the town and re-inspect the roadways. In terms of the program and the system maintenance, it's non-proprietary, so there's no software updating of anything, because it's just an access database, and it's integrated with GIS mapping. So it's not like, there's some programs out there like Cartograph or something like that, where more complex programs, they do a lot of other things, but typically, something like that, you would get, there'd be a cost to update the software each and every year. That's, whatever you have on a computer is how it works.
So essentially, we're talking about taking the same data we have and looking at it a little bit differently.
Looking at it differently.
And we're adding
So that we
GIS, so
can-
we'll have color to see our red roads, red roads.
And capital planning, I mean, that's going to be a big component of our effort, is to assist in the capital planning.
It's also not very efficient to pave a road, and I guess the saving grace of having so little money and not having paved many roads in the last 5 years is that each time we do it, it's a piece of paper. And it's in a big notebook, and one piece of paper is pulled out, and the other piece of paper is pulled in, pushed in, and attached to whatever, and then we print out the Excel. It's very cumbersome. I mean, we have needed this database since day one. I remember it was a prudent decision of the board not to go with a consultant that had done it. We did it in-house. I thought we did a pretty good job, and you can see that Rich's criteria and others, as I've said, is similar to what we're doing. This is going to expand it. In 5 years, we also need to expand our arsenal of tools. There's now some in-place paving that we're looking at. We'll expand the crack sealing, and as the technology grows, we'll be able to do more. Do I have to tell you we just don't have enough money to do what we'd all like to do? I mean, that's the understatement. But I believe this is money well spent when I brought it to the town manager. And it's certainly something we need. We just can't keep notebooks full of papers. And we go to the capital plan, and I really think it's a great budget tool. It's a great capital plan tool. It's something that we can show the residents what's been done, what's going to be done, and maybe more importantly, why. We have a plan.
Right, and I think I just want to just echo that the work you did was phenomenal. And I think the plan that you put together was extremely useful these last few years. I can see the case for efficiency, simplifying usage, making, if we're going to have the burden in your office to maintain this going forward, that the efficiency of this makes sense. So, in my head, I heard payment management plan. I thought back to one we had seen presented years ago, which was substantially more money. And I was, heart was racing a little bit, but this one makes a lot more sense.
No, I'm just kidding.
Just $50 more than what
Yeah.
you're charging.
We're really cheap around here.
If there's any additional questions on this, I'll take them. Otherwise, we can talk a little bit about Chase Road.
I just want to ask, personally, I'm very happy to see this plan. I think from what you've shown, I think it's going to be great. I think the GIS component is fantastic. One of the concerns that I had, and I would echo Mr. Matthews, I think you've done a phenomenal job with the pavement management plan that you have. But one of my concerns right from the onset was that it's an Excel spreadsheet versus something that's dynamic, such as an Access database or some other type of interface that's dynamic and you can query out and you can get specific data and you have the ability to manipulate that data easier. But one of the concerns that I have is that the data that we're looking at is 5 years old. So, we're talking about integrating that data. Obviously, 5 years, by the time we get the system up, or possibly 6 years, do we have any plans to do another inventory to determine the state of the roads compared to when we looked at them 5 years ago?
Simple answer is yes, and we've already begun that on the paper end of it. and this will accelerate that process.
Okay, so you're doing it in-house then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say that obviously for a DPW department to not have GIS mapping of not only the signs but the pavement management plan was a severe detriment from something that was, I think, a very good plan that we did in-house, as Jack's department did. So I'm very happy to see this, because it really brings us into, you really need a point and click of every component of your roadway system anyway. My only feeling is that all this is going, one of my biggest
I know where you're going.
My biggest fears is that all this is going to do is give a really great illustration of what we don't fund. And so we'll have lots of color things showing everything that nobody wants to pay for in town. And I don't know what to say to that. I mean, I hope every time we do one of these, I hope the plan at least enlightens some people to what we're asking for and what we're trying to do. As for the data being, and I agree with Mrs. Bertram about it being 5 years old potentially, but on the other hand, I'm like, well, I can certainly say that we haven't done them. They're not better than they were, and they were pretty bad 5 years ago. So, I'm all for redoing them, but there's only so much pain you can take about what conditions are the roads are in already. So.
I often tell boards and commissions and so forth that roads and bridges are not like fine wine. They don't better with age. No. They get worse. But, I don't know what the town does to augment your Chapter 90 allotment, but a lot of communities will then take this data and take the results of the capital plan and be able to say, even if it's to go to town meeting or whatever the budget process is, look, we get X amount of dollars from the state in Chapter 90 money in order for us to maintain what we got, maintain that pavement condition index number at 68. We would need this amount of money. If we want to improve it, we need to budget some additional money. And a lot of communities use this as that tool to go to the finance committee in these budget meetings, because if the roof is leaking, you're going to fix the roof. Your roadway network is a huge asset, and you just like you wouldn't let the building, you wouldn't let your house deteriorate.
I was going to say, I was going to interrupt you right there, saying every tact that you just said is
before?
what we've used. Everything you just said is what we've used.
What, did you say that?
Yes, we're fully aware of what the message is.
Thank God he didn't tell me that beforehand. So anyway, one of the other things, just me personally, is one of my fortes is helping cities and towns find money. As a matter of fact, that's how I met Jack, because I had got the funding for a project in Fitchburg many years ago, Summer Street and John Fitch Highway. And I happened to meet Jack, and he says, we're a small town, we don't have any money, and lo and behold, we ended up doing the Route 13 project. So in addition to Chase Road, the idea for me anyway is, once I'm in town, it's in my interest to help you folks find money, because it keeps me busy as well. Now, whether it's the TIP process or other funding programs, MassWorks is out there. There's another funding program out there called the Small Bottleneck Grant Program. Anyone ever heard of it? Probably not. We got $1 million in Newburyport to do an intersection, to do a roundabout at an intersection. So there are programs out there, and part of my job, in addition to doing all of this, is to bring this information to Jack and the manager and say, hey, look, here's a letter I wrote for you. The chairman of the Board of Selectmen should sign this and mail it. What's it for? I'd just mail it if I were you, that kind of a thing. So, so I mean, that's because
So moved.
What's
that?
So what is this, MASH all of a sudden?
Oh, you're right. But there's money out there. You have to turn over all the rocks, and everybody is strapping for additional funding, which is a good segue into Chase Road. The fact that Arthur contacted the town, the district contacted the town about, hey, we'd like you to consider doing Chase Road and putting it on the tip as a book job. When they come knocking with that kind of information, it's like, hats off to you folks for jumping all over it. And I know you and Jack have gone down there and spoke with them, and we're starting that process now with preparing the P&F, the project notification form, and the project information form to advance that project. And it's a process. It'll have to go, if you probably know the process, it goes back to the district reviews it, goes to the project review committee, which is made up of all the district highway directors and the project development engineers, and it goes to Boston, and they all vote on the priorities within each of the planning regions. It'll go to obviously to the local MPO, and they'll review it as well. But the fact that they're encouraging you to do this and to are in support of the project is huge. So we've been through that process hundreds of times, both on small projects up to multi-million-dollar projects, and every project's important. So we'll continue to push that forward. Once the P&F and PAF are completed, we'll meet with the district and go over the application. I know the PRC meets in November, so we'll be ready for that PRC meeting so that this project gets a priority, and we've answered all their questions. So I think it's a great opportunity. Like I said, when they come calling you saying, "Hey, would you folks want to do this project?" That's great.
Let me just credit where credit's due. They came calling because Ms. Bertram pounded on their door 6 or 8 times, but we did go down, and they were very encouraging, right, Paula? I mean,
Yes,
they did in fact encourage us to apply. I mean, they didn't come out of the woodwork. Paula did the legwork and pursued it, and I can tell you, I think Rich matches your, which is something to say. Well, he walks that fine line between being a pain in the neck and being very persistent.
Oh, be careful!
Where you going, man?
Very persistent. I said him. No, I said him. I said Rich does that. So,
So which side is she on?
Kudos
You have to prepare an emergency segue here.
kudos to Paula for getting us to this point, and we were encouraged by Mass Highway, and now Rich is going to help us get that funding, and I think that's going to happen.
Just to give you, I have become a member of the MPO for District 3, and that's how I became aware of the whole process and understanding the funding and being involved in the funding and understanding what monies are available is what prompted me to meet with Jack and understand our needs, and then we met with District 3 to go over what they thought, out of all the priorities that we chose, what they felt would be a priority and what they would support. So that's how that came about. But I did have one follow-up question on the pavement management plan, and that was the cost. You quoted a price of $11,700. Does that include integrating our existing data, or is there additional cost for data conversion? Because, as the town manager pointed out, there is going to be some data manipulation that has to occur because our grading system is very different, I think, than what you guys are looking at. So is that all included in that cost?
It includes integrating the data you have. And the reason the cost is where it is, if we had to go out and inspect all the streets, obviously the price would have been double what we're...
Okay.
Because a lot of the effort is boots on the ground out there inspecting each and every street. Okay. So in this case, we don't have to do that, but that cost does include integrating the data you have.
Great.
Yep.
Mr.
Ebersol.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Chase Road, is that the segment from 2A to Northfield?
It's actually a segment from Northfield to the Townsend line.
Okay.
You recall last year we did a piece of pavement from 2A to just south of Northfield Road.
Okay.
It would be from Northfield for all intents and purposes, that intersection right down the Townsend line.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I want to thank Jack, you gentlemen from World Tech. I think you did a great job in going over the signs and the pavement management plan. It's nice to hear the pavement management plan is evolving to the next phase. And it was very interesting hearing about regulations of signs and how compliant we are. And, but actually, no, it's very interesting because I think, and also to point out to us what we need to do as far as adopting the existing road signs. I think that really pointed out something that I don't know that anybody on this board before that, certainly speaking for myself, I didn't realize that what work we have to do really to get our arms around a whole history of sign placement and make sure that those are all accepted properly.
Just as a follow-up on the signs, and I understand that the local signs, the stop signs, the one-way streets, et cetera, are something that we do locally, but I thought that I heard that there was detailed engineering study and approval by MassDOT for speed traffic
regulation.
signs. And so that's something we're also going to have to look into, is whether or not we've gone through that process.
We didn't look at other regulatory signs, but we did compare speed limit signs to special speed regulations on file, and there were 16 speed limit signs town-wide. 9 of them are compliant, and 7 of them were not. Looks like they were small and non-standard looking and may have been put up by residents.
But I think, excuse me for interrupting, but I think Mrs. Bertram's concern is not the sign compliance.
Sure.
It was the adoption of the speed limit
the adoption of
zones
the
The
right.
engineering.
that you mentioned that they had to be adopted by certain
Yes,
procedures.
I'm saying that most of the signs out there have been adopted and approved by DOT. There's actually one special speed regulation that was adopted northbound on Electric Avenue. There are no signs to support it based on our inventory.
Okay.
So can you just give me that number again? You said there were 16 signs, and how many are compliant?
9 of
Nine.
them were.
9 are compliant.
We actually have a few copies of the report, and I'll leave one that
Okay.
describes that in detail.
Just and while we're on it, just so you understand the special speed regulation piece, the only one that can approve a special speed regulation is Mass DOT and the registry. Even the prima facie speed on a street, so thickly settled district is 30 miles per hour. You can't go out and put up a 30 mile per hour sign. That's not lawful in the Commonwealth. The only one that can approve a speed limit sign being put up is Mass DOT, and then of course the town would adopt that sign. So a lot of communities have signs up. We had one community that called us. They had 81 speed limit signs throughout the city. They had no special speed regulations. Someone challenged the sign, got a ticket, happened to be an attorney, and turned around and went to Mass DOT, and Mass DOT sent a letter to this community and said, you need to take the speed limit signs down within 30 days, I'll lose your Chapter 90 money. So the director called up and says, oh, what do we do with this now? I said, well, take the sign down. They left, the other ones were still in place. But that's what Michael's talking about. So out of the 16, 7 of them don't have a special speed regulation with it. And we go right to Mass DOT in Boston to check that when we do that. That was one thing that I don't think it was in our scope, but we did it anyway here. We did not check your ordinance as part of our scope previously. Important stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Somebody else?
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, again.
Thank
I
you.
think you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Minutes. And warrants. Accounts payable in the amount of $279,175.13. Payroll in the amount of $642,252.22. And payroll deduction warrant in the amount of $139,424.86. Action file issues. Any action file issues?
Yes.
Mr. Matthews?
It's a new one, kind of. A few years ago, and it's been a few years ago, we had a joint meeting with the Parks Commission. Discussion was about the track and field, the fees that were collected for the various groups using it, and putting aside funding not only for the annual maintenance, but thinking ahead to when that needs to be replaced, the turf. And I don't think anything ever came of that officially. They were going to work that out and get back with us. As we're looking at that field, we're probably getting into next 5 to 10 years, we're probably looking at replacing it. Especially if we do a high school project and we put a lot of use on that field, it may accelerate it. So I'm just curious if we're going to be able to put some money aside or how we want to approach that, because that's going to be a capital project. It's going to be a significant amount of money, and it would be good if we could show history where funding has come in and at least offset some of the expense when we get to that point.
Would you like to start?
Yeah, just, that meeting, it probably was a couple of years ago at this point in time, and the board did ask the Parks Commission to put together a proposal, because right now the operations and maintenance of the field are covered through fees that are paid either by different organizations that are using it, or the school or something like that. But the replacement of that really hasn't been considered, and so that was what they were going to do. It is my intention, and I've talked to the DPW director about this, that it is time that we put that in the capital plan. I think the useful life on that field was to expire around 2017 or so. So that coincides with the school building project, but it is a significant project, and it does need to be put in the capital plan as a project, even though we haven't decided completely how we're going to go about paying for that. We do need to put the community on notice that within the next several years, that is a project.
If I may. I've had one meeting at the DPW where I invited what I call the decision makers, the town manager, the superintendent of the schools. This is the first meeting that we've had on this topic, not many meetings. Not any meetings, and invited the Lunenburg Track and Field Association, the athletic director, Mr. Londa was there. We just, this is the sell, Dave, in common language. What I see happening down there is that, and from what I read in the paper, is that the turf field is going to have to accept all the activity, even more so than it does today. And I'm quite sure you were at that meeting. I know Tom was, when Brian Kane, former park commissioner, came in and said, as Ms. Spidell said, it has a life expectancy. The life expectancy is probably going to coincide with the completion of the proposed project, but certainly with all this extra activity, it's going to exacerbate the situation that's already there. And the value of having an 8-year-old that's on it all the time is that I get hours to spend and look at the turf, and it is in failure, in lots of places. It was not the top of the line material. It was a wonderful project. I want to preface anything that might be construed as being negative by saying that, it was a wonderful job. People put in lots of hours and a lot of volunteer time, and we should be thankful for that. Nevertheless, now it's our issue. And Ms. Spidell and I have had discussions about the capital plan. I believe she has more faith in the capital plan than do I. But this is the way I see it. We're looking at probably estimate of around $700,000 to pull the turf up, put top of the line turf down, and as with the road program, if you now resurface the blue track, it'll be significantly less. But that's the number we have right now to do that. My concern is that if we don't put away some money or earmark money or have money in a drawer somewhere, that the field is going to get beat up, going to get ruined because of all this activity, and it's not new to begin with, so it was scheduled to be fixed anyway. And now we're going to spend, I don't know, what's the figure now? Townsend, $40-50 million on a school, wonderful new fields, but who is going to have the appetite at the completion of this project for me or anybody else to come forward and say, you know what, now we need $700,000 for the field? I don't see that as happening. The public opinion may be that, well, we have new fields here. I just see it, not, with all respect, Kerry, not in the capital plan, but as a component of the overall project. Now, I understand the reimbursement process, and I understand that this would not be reimbursable. However, I think tens of millions of dollars is certainly a lot of money. To put $1 more million and to have that build in that momentum that you can feel now building to have the school and the fields done might be a smart way to do that. I don't think there's any guarantee. I mean, going back to the pavement management plan and what you said, Tom, it just shows us how much money we don't have to spend. We've had the capital $800,000 on the capital plan for pavement management for 3, 4, 5 years, I think, since we've had the capital plan. And it comes up for discussion, but I think people become desensitized to it. Yeah, we need the money, but you know what, we just don't have the money. Well, I don't think we can allow this facility, that was built with so much care and time being donated, and frankly, that isn't even completely paid for yet, just go by the boards for lack of funding. And again, to be redundant, my fear is that at the completion of this project, my sense is that there will be no appetite to come up with that extra $700,000 to $1 million to now resurface the track. So if it's in the whole project, say our end is 40 million. Well, say now our end is 41 million.
They're not saying that, and please don't, because you're throwing numbers out there that's
Okay.
going to mislead.
Only
and
for
alarm. So
example.
let's-
For example. Okay.
Well, it's a scary example.
All right. Well, the example I was
I don't
given
think it's accurate either.
by
so
the
I'm just-
facilities man, I'm going on the example I was given by the facilities manager. So I apologize if I'm giving wrong information.
There's no point in inflaming when we don't need to. We won't try to have a conversation. That's my only point, Jack.
Mr. Chairman, I think the question was user fees for the existing facility. Where are those fees going, and is that going into a pool that would be available towards the...
That was the initial.
That was the initial question.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the user fees, and I need to refresh myself on this whole thing, but I think they're basically to cover the ongoing operation and not for any replacement. And I think the concern with the capital plan is in any one year, we spend $500,000. This is a $700,000 project. We have a lot of capital needs, and I think we just all have to accept that at some point in the very near future, it's going to be impossible to fund all of our capital needs without doing some borrowing. Now, I'm not saying doing it outside of the levy, because we have some debt service being paid off. But I think in the next couple of years, we're going to have to look at doing a borrowing within the levy to cover whatever portion of this turf project is assigned to the town as a whole. We're also looking at needing to replace some of our fire apparatus, in any number of things.
Okay, I'm going to try to rein this back, and I'm going to try this another tack, because I don't know that I heard the answer to the initial question. So I appreciate all the extra stuff that's going through the capital plan and all the things we have to consider. But we sat at a table with the Park Commission, I think it was approximately 2 years ago, where the then chair of the Park Commission said it was their intent, and he wanted the support of the Board of Selectmen, to look at increasing the user fees, and a portion of that increase be put aside for the eventual replacement. Now, it was clear even back then that whatever we collected would never, in the time that the field needed to be resurfaced, would never be that amount, the $700,000 we're talking about. But they would have something. So I think the question is, A, were those increases ever put into place? And B, if they haven't, do we have any plans to do that? Or why haven't they already been done? Because this was, again, I understand that the commission has changed membership, probably in a large degree, if not every member. But it was a good plan then, and I felt from a board member here that was on the verge of being implemented, and here we are 2 years later, and it sounds like it hasn't been. So, A, I guess the first question is, has it been? And B, if it hasn't been, will it be?
Okay, and I apologize. I thought I answered that question, and I obviously didn't answer that question. It has not been done, and we do have a completely new Parks Commission since then, so that is something that we need to task them to do, and now is the time to do that.
Okay. And everything else, I think, that was discussed is way speculative, and we need to obviously be aware of this field
Correct.
going forward in any regard that we are looking to do it. So we can't.
Okay, let me put it, I get passionate about things. So if I've expounded upon numbers that are erroneous, you have my apologies. We'll see how those numbers turn out. It's not my intention to inflame people. When I use those numbers, I almost use them to say, listen, I'm not against the project. In fact, having an 8-year-old, I'm all for the project. I just don't want the field to be to be left aside during the project, and I see momentum building for the project as it should. I would just like the repair and rehab of this field to be carry on with part of that momentum.
Well, and I would echo that. I think it's a huge asset to this community. I thought it was a huge asset when it was underway and when it was finally completed, when the stands were finally put in. So I hope that we can convince people, as I think most people in this room already do, that it is a very positive asset to this community, and all assets such as that and the other projects we're talking about tonight, whether they were the roadway systems or the school building. I mean, we need to take everything as a whole, and we're asking people to listen to and really evaluate a lot.
Oh, exactly. Take it as a whole. I think
that's what we need
key.
to do.
That's
Right.
key. Take it as a whole so that one thing doesn't get left behind.
So, any other action? Thank you, Jack.
Okay.
Any other action file issues? Okay, committee reports. Board of Health,
Meeting later this month.
building reuse.
Haven't met since our last meeting. Next meeting is Monday, the 16th.
Capital planning.
Also hasn't met since our last meeting, but we'll meet on the 25th to start reviewing the input from this year's capital plans.
Okay. Finance committee.
Next meeting, September 26th.
Library board of trustees.
They're meeting later this month, but noting that they've begun the painting of the building.
MPO.
No, the meeting was canceled until October.
Planning board.
Last night's planning board, and it sounds, I think everybody was able to catch it, but most of the meeting was an executive session or a good portion of it, and then it was really just updates on various ongoing matters. But I did want to bring a couple things back to this board because I think it involves us. And one was 925 Mass Ave, as they were looking for information and updates on where that property is, and I had indicated that you were continuing to work on that, but there was quite concerns about liability. This is the gas station. And how the town, it is owned, but they do have would like some further information about what the status of that property is. The other thing that came up is the chairman indicated that they had just received an inventory of town-owned land, and that Lake Shirley is listed by the assessors as owned by the town of Lunenburg. And so I just think that perhaps we should look into that. I know that the dam is owned by... Sorry?
I'm sorry.
We're not going to get into that.
Okay.
We've done this. We had a long, lengthy time where we discussed this, and believe me, this is not being discussed again. Certainly at this board.
Okay. Well, perhaps...
We could look back. We could look back at the history. We could have people play back all the research and minutes of the last 2 years or something.
Well, we just need to understand there, and I think this is something that I said back then, is that there's a liability exposure for the town to own a lake. So if everybody's on board with that, that's fine. But
Who wants to buy it?
There's some
Look at some offers.
There's some, and again, I mean, and I think that I questioned this then, is when the order of conditions came forward to do the chemical treatment at the lake, which was paid for by private funds. It was done so by the Lake Shirley Improvement Corporation, and while the town of Lunenburg certainly accepted the dam, there is nothing that the town of Lunenburg accepted Lake Shirley. And if we are all on board with owning the lake, that's fine.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that whole discussion was concluding as I started with the town. So I just know we have files and files and legal bills up the wazoo on researching the title, pardon the language.
That were all inconclusive.
But right,
That were
and that's what I was going to
inconclusive.
say, that it was completely
the minutes reflect that.
inconclusive.
Well, and it was absolutely...
technical language.
And that is exactly my point, Mr. Chairman, is that it was inconclusive.
Right.
So why we are listed as the owner concerns me, because it was inconclusive.
We may need to
At
check with
no
the assessor
time-
about that.
At
to
no
see if there's
time
any
did the town of
determination.
Lunenburg, it was very inconclusive, and there was a title search, and the end result was that it's still unknown.
Right.
So for us to be listed as the owner of record by the town, by the assessors, I'm unclear as to why that
I think we know
is.
that every time there's a parcel of land that's unknown, And at some point defaults to the town. I mean,
Right, it does, and I will specifically ask about this, but that is exactly what happens. If it's owner's unknown, it's always put
Under the name of the town.
in care of the town, and that's just
Well, and
how the
and
assessors.
and all I'm saying is we might want to look at that, because I know
It
that
may
there's
need
a
to be
parcel in Hickory Hills that has been unknown. It was it was an old well site, and it's an abandoned well site, and obviously there's some concerns with having an abandoned well site, and the town has specifically kept it as owners unknown. So I think we need to look at that. The other thing that came up was the primary building, and Jamie might be able to shed some light on this, but there was questions as to the building reuse, why that building wasn't looked at, and Damon, I think, did a very good job of answering the question, is that there are specific buildings that the Building Reuse Committee is looking at.
That's correct.
And they're all kind of stemming from the TC Passios reuse.
Exactly.
So I think that he answered that very well, and I relayed that we are still looking at the John Jewel and RCAP project, and that's still very active, and we're waiting for an update, but that project is still ongoing, which is why we're not looking at reallocating the use of that primary building.
Right, there's
Yeah.
there's
And-
an option
There's an agreement in
on that
place.
property.
And that's the only thing that I'd like to clear up, is that it gets referred to quite often as nothing's happened to it. The truth of the matter is something is happening, but it's a long process.
Right, and it
And
is still
for that
active.
reason, it was not part of the charter of the Building Reuse Committee.
Right, and it is a very active project. At some point, we do need to revisit that, because they were going to come back, I think, with some concessions, and so we do need to put that back on our agenda at some point, because I'm not sure what that time window is for them to reapply.
Right,
But I think it's approaching, so we might.
I can give you an update on both of those buildings that
Okay.
you talked about.
Okay.
With respect to the Eagle Heights project, which is the old primary school, I met with RCAP Solutions and John Jewel and Mass Development probably 2 weeks ago. They asked me to attend a meeting, because when they were here last, they talked about that the federal funds through the HUD 202 program are really not available, essentially not available for this type of development, and that they were looking at state funding. So the purpose of that meeting was to talk to the folks at Mass Development that deal with housing tax credits. And so we did have that meeting. It was a very productive meeting. They are going back, John Jewel and RCAP going back and looking at the feasibility of moving forward with partial grants funding from the state and tax credits. And so they're putting that proposal together, and they will come back to the town when they're ready to do that. At the same time, I have tasked the assessor with putting together an appraisal on that property, and also have talked to the assessor further about a pilot or some sort of tax arrangement for that property, because that is something that they are adamant that they need in order to secure their funding. They're adamant that there are other similar projects in other communities that have a pilot or tax agreement. And so we're in the process of getting that data so I can have the assessor go in and look at these other projects and find out how these communities were able to grant pilots or tax agreements. So that's what we're working on right now, and I would imagine in the next probably 45 to 60 days they will be back here to work on that, to present that to you. In terms of 925 Mass Ave, I mean, there is, it is privately owned. We knew where the owner was up until probably 6 months ago. We're not able to locate the owner right now. We do have a tax title on the property that we could foreclose on. I did have an LSP, a licensed site professional, take a look at that property, and he put together a proposal for doing some further work on the property that I have not moved forward with, because we don't own the property, and so I don't want to put any money into that. What I would like to do in the near future is probably pay him a small retainer, have him go down to DEP with me and the fire chief and whoever, and kind of lay everything out on the table and find out how they would recommend that we would proceed. And it just really, for lack of time, we haven't moved forward. There are some other things that are unfortunately a higher priority. I would love to do something with that. I hope that we can do something soon, but it's complicated because we don't own it and we're not 100% sure of the level of contamination. I think we have a good idea that the level of contamination is pretty well mitigated at this point, but you never know until you get into that. So we would want to know if we took title to that, have a complete understanding of what our liability would be, and know that there is funding through DEP to mitigate. There's a lot of interest in the property. I have a file. I've had probably 4 or 5 different individuals or businesses express some interest in that. But nobody's interested in it in the state that it's in. They want the town to take it and clean it up, and I just need to be sure that if we do that, we're not assuming some liability that we don't have at the present time.
Right, and that's basically what I relayed, is that there's a liability concern and understanding what our exposure is if we were to foreclose on the property. Additionally, I think it's important to understand that while there is state funding for these types of things, a grant or state funding is typically a competitive process. So although they could say that it's a good candidate, that doesn't mean that we're going to get funding. So understanding our potential liability at the onset is going to be really important. So I think meeting with DEP absolutely makes sense, and trying to get a handle on exactly what our exposure is. The final thing I wanted to bring up, and Mr. Ebersol alluded to this at the beginning of the meeting, was a question came up as to what the role of a liaison is to boards, and I guess I'm curious as to your input from each of you as to how you see your role as a liaison. And I think there's a difference. I think that obviously Mr. Matthews' involvement with school building committee is different than the planning board liaison. The question came up of, as a liaison, what is your role? The way I've interpreted it as a liaison between the planning board, which is obviously an elected board within the town, is to simply come back and to relay information from the meeting so that everyone, so this board is aware of what's going on at the planning board level. And obviously, if a situation comes up where a question arises that I can answer a question or be a resource, that makes sense, but it's not my role to participate in their discussion unless requested to do so. Obviously, I have, me being me, have participated on a personal level in various discussions. However, I guess I'd like to understand if that's how you all see a liaison position.
Right. I mean, there's a definite difference. There's a membership, which is one set of duties and responsibilities, and then there's a liaison.
Right.
And I think there was some confusion on that discussed last night. Member, you're a full voting member. You need to make decisions, et cetera. Now, if I'm a member as a representative of this board, I always try to get the input of this board before I go forth. As a liaison, I think you captured it. I mean, it's purely a communication flow back and forth.
Okay.
My expectation, anyway. And again, you don't speak for the board necessarily unless it's something that they've asked for, and then you go back and report to them. But it's your essential. But liaisons essentially is a bystander.
Exactly.
When we instituted this and we took the task of actually assigning or asking for volunteers for liaisons, it was clearly with 2 principles in mind that were first and foremost, and they were that that liaison would report back to this board anything that was of importance that this board needed to be aware of, because things were happening and we would find out last minute from different boards. So we wanted people to be aware of that. And number 2 is it was always with the understanding that it was not participatory beyond what you would be as a public attendee of such a meeting. So if you had public comment or you had pertinent information that board or commission or committee could use, but you'd be acting individually, not on behalf of the whole board. Those are the 2 most important criteria, I think, that we discussed.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I relayed last night, but I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page.
I think the other part goes to, there's 2 things I'll say. One is that on the participatory, it's at the time of the open discussion and not after every topic,
right,
unless they seek your information. So for instance, they ask Paula some information based on what had gone on the Eagle Heights or project like that. So therefore, asking the question during a discussion is appropriate. adding a comment. So for instance, I'm the liaison to the Sewer Commission, which I used to be on, so I have a history of information. I will hold my comment till afterwards or talk to the chair afterwards to say, unless it is something that's vital to that discussion, and I may raise my hand. I'm just thinking about that when we have other boards that are now starting to institute some liaison, they weren't part of this board's original establishment of that, and that's why I think a very simple, not a big job description, but a simple description, I took some notes down from the discussion tonight to explain to a potential liaison from any board to another board of what their duties would and would not be.
Mr. Chairman, I agree totally with what we've just said, and I just want to point out that there are two different roles. One is the liaison role, which we all have volunteered and serve, and I agree with Mr. Eversole that is most notably during the public comment section, unless you're asked to give some input. There are some other boards that we serve on as members of the board, and that's quite different and shouldn't be confused.
Yes, agreed. Okay, school committee, PAC, sorry.
The meeting will be next Tuesday, and Carrie's arranging the meeting with them to meet with us.
Okay, school committee.
I did not attend their last meeting.
School building committee.
Has not met, but we've started to, with the school open houses, we have started to have people at the open houses with some of the layouts of the potential building or the designs, and just kind of engage parents, answer questions, just kind of talk to them, just try to raise the level of engagement in the community, and just keep people thinking about it, talking about it, because of course this is coming up really quick. You know, we don't have a whole lot of time until this will be in front of the voters. So currently, again, the architect and the construction management company are going through doing a cost analysis of the project. They will then eventually compare the notes on those, and they will come to terms on what the best final solution is going to be, final project is going to be, and the best cost will be for the town. So
excellent. Sewer Commission.
Sewer Commission is meeting tonight. They're finalizing their rules and regulations, which they will have a notice in the Lunenburg Ledger soon, and they'll be in effect by the end of this month. That's been a very long process for them to adopt all the rules and regulations in a proper way.
And no update from Mass Broadband. Town manager reports.
I have two quick items. You had requested several weeks ago that we have the executive director from the Neshoba Valley Regional Emergency Communications District, or Communication Center here, along with the two chiefs. And we had talked about probably doing it sometime this month. We likely will be scheduling that next month and maybe mid to the end of the month. And the reason is that the town of Harvard has yet to come on to the district. They have a separate cable company, so separate lines. They're not working. They're with Charter Communications. And so there have been some issues with tying them in via fiber. And so their admission into the center is delayed, and so the executive director is working to complete that project, and it makes sense to have him put his effort into that first. So we would be doing something more like the middle of October, probably. And the second item I wanted to mention is the casino project over in Leominster. Boy, mentioning it at the meeting last week, got people talking about the project. I do have a meeting, an initial meeting set up with the developer for later this week. And I actually invited the town administrator in Townsend, because I think one of the big concerns is the potential impact to the Route 13 corridor. And so the two of us, we will be attending the meeting. It's just the initial meeting to get an understanding of the project, and then I think it makes sense. What I'd like to do is do a pretty complete report at next week's meeting, and then decide how you want to proceed with that. I do, I'm not sure that we will be officially designated a surrounding community that they must engage in mitigation. I'm still trying to figure that whole thing out. It's also not a foregone conclusion that project is going to get a license. They're competing. There's some hefty competition for that particular license. So,
And it hasn't even met local, I mean, the local election is
It's
ballot
at-
question is soon, right?
it's at the end of this month,
Right.
but I mean, everything that I'm hearing, word of mouth is that the city of Leominster voters will support the project. I think the location and the economic stimulus to the community is enough to get people interested in that. And the location is, I mean, it's probably about as good a location as you can have for that type of project. So I think the project has merit, but again, it's not a foregone conclusion that that project is going to be licensed.
Okay. No appointments or reappointments. We do have an executive session, but before I read that, I would ask if anybody on the board has any final public comment before we go into executive session. Any of the public? Seeing none. I would entertain a motion that we go into executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Subsection 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel and to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel. This discussion is for the town manager's employment contract renewal. We will not be returning to open session, and the chair so declares that.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Mr. Ebersol?
Aye.
Mr. Toll?
Aye.
Mr. Matthews?
Aye.
Mrs. Bertram?
Aye.
And I for myself. Good night, everyone. We will see you next Tuesday.
Performing and writing music around that 24th Caprice by Niccolo Paganini.